Namaste students. I am Basavaraj Bilgi, Assistant Professor of English GFCC Eragatti. Today we will discuss a poem called Telephone Conversation by Wole Soyinka, a Nigerian poet, dramatist, and political activist. Wole Soyinka, born in the year 1934, he was a multifaceted person because he wrote dramas, he wrote poems, he wrote novels, he was also a autobiographer, he was a script writer and a critic. He is known for his dramas. The dramas which he wrote are like this: The Strong Breed, The Trials of Brother Zero, The Lion and the Jewel, and The Road, Death and the King's Horseman. And his collection of poems include Idaner and Other Poems, Poems from Prison, A Shuttle in the Crypt, and Mantella's Earth and Other Poems. He got Nobel Prize in the year 1986. He was the first African writer to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. He is known as the finest man of letters from Africa. He was imprisoned more than once for his dissidence by the Nigerian government. Soyinka now lives and teaches in America. He wrote all kind of dramas. He wrote comedies, tragedies, and political satire. And he was also very much active in the theater of the absurd. The present poem, Telephone Conversation, is a 1963 poem by the Nigerian writer Wole Soyinka that satirizes racism. In the 19th and 20th century, early 20th century, there was a lot of discrimination between white and black people. White people discriminated the dark people, the black people. They were looked down upon, and the white people thought themselves as superior in class, in breed, and in their life. That's where these black people were looked down upon, and they were not given even a place to live. That's where the poem gets its life. The poem describes a phone call between a landlady and the speaker. The present poem is a conversation between a landlady and the speaker. The landlady is pleasant until she learns that the speaker is African. The landlady is very much happy that she is getting a tenant, but she becomes unhappy, she becomes sad when she learns that the tenant is African. She demands to know how light or dark the speaker's skin is. She wants to know the color of the speaker. She wants to know whether the speaker is very dark or light dark. In response, the speaker cleverly mocks the landlady's ignorance and prejudice, demonstrating that characterizing people by their skin color diminishes their humanity. The speaker tries to subvert the idea of the landlady, the white woman, who thinks that the black people are inferior, and she thinks that they are less than animals. That's where the speaker becomes agitated, and he mocks her, he criticizes her views. The poem runs like this: The poet is on the lookout for an apartment to rent in London. The poet, or the speaker of the poem, is searching an apartment to rent in London. He goes through the newspapers, advertisements, and decides on an apartment that he finds reasonable to his pocket. He finds an advertisement about an apartment in the newspaper and he decides that this apartment is viable to him because the landlady or the owner of the home in the advertisement expected less rent. That's where he decides the apartment fits to his pocket, his income. And he decides to call the lady and talk to her. The landlady and he the speaker also comes to know that the landlady doesn't live in that apartment. That's a great opportunity for this black man to get that home, he thinks. He calls the landlady to show his interest in the apartment and also tell her that he is black before he can see her to negotiate the deal. He does not want to waste his time traveling to see her if she does not want a colored tenant. This is the background of the poem, and we will read the poem and discuss the things. The price seemed reasonable, location indifferent. The landlady swore she lived off premises, nothing remained but self confession. Madame, I warned. I hate a wasted journey. I am African. Silence. Silenced transmission of pressurized good breeding. The speaker calls the landlady after he sees the advertisement in a newspaper and she tells him that she doesn't live in the apartment and he becomes happy that the owner is not living in the apartment, and that's a great idea. Nothing remained, everything is settled because he is ready to pay the rent which she has expected, and she is not living in the apartment. That's a good combination, the speaker thinks. But only one thing remains, that is self confession. Confession, confession. Confession means ತಪ್ಪೊಪ್ಪಿಗೆ. The speaker says, Madam, I warned. I hate a wasted journey. The speaker tells the landlady that he doesn't want to waste his time and money on traveling to and fro to the apartment. And he says, I am African. Suddenly, from the other side, there is a pin drop silence. What kind of silence it is? Silence, silenced transmission of pressurized good breeding. He realizes that this silence is because of the pressure of good breeding. He says the landlady thinks that she is of a good breed because she is white, and she also thinks that the speaker is of bad breed because he is black. Voice, when it came after some pause, the woman, the landlady, speaks. How her voice is? It is lipstick coated. Her lips are full of lipstick, long gold rolled, cigarette holder piped. Caught eye was Polly. How dark? The landlady asks the, the speaker, how dark are you? I had not misheard. Suddenly, the speaker thinks, had I misheard? The lady asking my color. Are you light or very dark? The landlady asks the speaker whether you are light or very dark. Button B, button A. Button B, button A is a public telephone booths in England used to be painted red, and the old style ones required the user to push buttons A and B to put in coins and make connections. Pillar boxes for posting mail and buses, especially in London, are also red. Stench. Stench is foul, striking, stinking smell, very bad smell of rancid breathe of public hide and speak. The poet addresses the telephone booth as hide and speak because he thinks that people speaking in telephone booth are hiding the reality and presenting what is not real. Red booth, red pillar box, red double tired omnibus, squelching tar. It was real, shamed by ill mannered silence, surrender, pushed, dumbfounded to beg simplification. He says, all things are red in the telephone booth, but the soul of the landlady is not red. He says, her soul is like tar. And he also says, it is a real shame because of the ill mannered silence. The woman, the landlady, false silence, which the speaker thinks is ill mannered. Considerate she was, varying the emphasis. She repeats the same question. She asks again, are you dark or very light? Revelation came. Now the speaker tells the truth. You mean like plain or milk chocolate? The speaker mocks the landlady's words and he wants to turn the table up upon her. And you mean like plain or milk chocolate? Her accent was clinical, crushing in its light. Her accent was very clinical and it was crushing in its light. Impersonality, rapidly, wavelength adjusted. He says it was a rapid question. There was no pause in her question. I choose. The poet wants to make a joke upon the landlady. He tells her that he is from West Africa and has a sepia dark complexion. It has been mentioned in his passport, which she can see and confirm. After a moment's silence at the other end, the landlady questions him about the exact shade of sepia. She doesn't understand the word sepia and she wants him to clear what do you mean by sepia? What's that conceding? Don't know what that is? The speaker once again mocks her and he replies to her like brunette. He replies, it is brunette like the jet black hair of a woman. That's dark, isn't it? Again, the lady asks, isn't it dark? She asks him. And he says, not altogether. The speaker says, not that dark, madam. He says, he says, facially, I am brunette. He says, I am like a brunette. I am black facially. But, madame, you should see the rest of me. He says, if she wants to see it for herself, his face is dark brunette, but the rest of him, he says, the palms of his hand and the soles of his feet are lighter. They are peroxide blonde. Friction caused foolishly, madame, by sitting down has turned my bottom raven black. One moment, madame, sensing her receiver rearing on the thunderclap about my ears. Madame, I pleaded, wouldn't you rather see for yourself? He says, but because he has been sitting down on his back, his bottom is very dark. The landlady at the other end is obviously shocked at such insolence, and before she can bang down the receiver of her telephone, he mischievously asks her whether she would like to see and examine the various shades of dark on his body for herself, so that he could come over to satisfy her. Here, the question the landlady asks is also very bad, and how the speaker replies to the question is very what we call a right answer to the lady. This is how the poem runs and it ends. Now we shall discuss some of the themes of the poem. The first one is prejudice. Prejudice is the main theme of the poem. Telephone conversation, it illustrates prejudice perfectly. The poem is packed with puns, irony, and sarcasm. It is hard to imagine that this conversation actually took place. Soyinka tries to make light of the situation, but it isn't really funny. The speaker, a West African man, uses words like confession and court. Yet he has done nothing wrong. He just needs a place to live, a basic need. But even in his attempt to secure his living accommodation, he has to still explain and clarify who and what he is. The landlady is so polite, but so judgmental and prejudiced against black folk. The speaker's anger is evident in the repeated use of the word red and in the poem's pauses. West African sepia is priceless. In the end, he offers his hours for weaving. This is classic Soyinka. Soyinka makes fun of everything, but in the pun, he makes a big revelation. There are a lot of silences in the poem. The first episode of silence in the telephone conversation between the poet and the landlady is caused when he tells her in the beginning that he is an African who wants to rent her apartment. The landlady's good breeding receives a setback and she takes some time to recover from the shock. She is obviously racist in her attitude, but her good manners make her continue the conversation and find out the exact shade of dark the poet's complexion is. In the second episode of silence, the speaker is dumbfounded when the lady asks him the exact shade of dark his complexion is. Are you dark or very light? The landlady's curiosity forces him to break his silence on describing his complexion, West African sepia, which is written in his passport. When the landlady cannot make that out, the surrender takes place, and the speaker describes the various shades of dark that parts of his body are. The poet describes the public telephone booth as public hide and speak because one can hide one's real expressions from the person he is speaking to in the telephone booth. Pacing such questions as the landlady asks him would have been a shame and an embarrassment to him had he been talking to her face to face. In the telephone booth, he may be dumbfounded for a moment, but he can give vent to his feelings by describing to her, tongue in cheek, the various shades of dark that parts of his body have, and the landlady at the other end is embarrassed with such vivid description. West African sepia means dark brown. Here he is indirectly telling the woman that dark is beautiful. West African sepia means dark brown. When he describes the color of his skin as mentioned in the passport, the lady replies, "Don't know what this is." When he elaborates that it is like brunette, that is, the dark color of a woman's hair, the landlady says, "That's dark, isn't it?" This makes the poet launch into a graphic description of the various parts of his body. He is overall brunette, but the palms of his hands and the soles of his feet are of a lighter shade, peroxide blonde. His bottom, though, because he has been sitting on it, is dark black, and then he invites her to see him and confirm all this for herself. All that glitters is not gold. He, the next theme is all that glitters is not gold. The poet says that the black is not that ugly, and he says all the white people are also not good, and we should not believe a thing by its color. He wants to convey to the lady. Uh, the speaker knows that the British are still racist in their attitude, makes a self confession right in the beginning. He tells landlady that he is African. If she likes to rent out her apartment to him, he would see her, otherwise, it would be a wasted journey. But when the landlady starts questioning him how exactly dark he is, the speaker feels insulted and humiliated. First, he doubts he has misheard but when she persists, he turns the tables on her by graphically describing what shades of dark the various parts of his body are. Absurdity of racism. There is a conflict between the protagonist and the absurdity of racism that makes the antagonist take a negative stance towards him. The struggles begin with the protagonist's confession of being an African, a black man, which sparks up the notions of racism inside the landlady, who denies renting him the house. The fear of being judged on the merit of being a black man projects a heavily corrupt image of the society where individuality is at stake. The idea is to depict how brutal it can be for a man who is subjected to racial discrimination. Thoughts of racism and pre-notions come blended with an element of irony that takes over the poem Telephone Conversation. Hypocrisy. Although the landlady is white and displays a stark racist attitude, the speaker refuses to allow her the advantage that her white skin and good breeding give her by confusing her with the various shades of dark, from plain to milk chocolate, from brunette to raven black, and by inviting her to see the various parts of his body, he gains the upper hand over her by the end of the poem. Uh, both of them, both the speaker as well the landlady, are hypocritical. Good breeding signifies innate politeness and courtesy, but the landlady's breeding is probably superficial. The veneer comes off easily when she questions the speaker how dark his complexion is. Courteous and differential so par. The speaker loses his cool when she persists in knowing the exact shade of dark his complexion is. He, however, uses politeness as a weapon to get the upper hand over her by graphically describing the various shades of dark that his body parts are. Then, equally politely, he inquires whether she would like to see them for herself. Thank you very much. I am Basavaraj Bilgi, Assistant Professor of GFCC Yaragatti. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel Basavaraj Bilgi. Thank you very much.